Afternoon, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest video here on Up the Cherries in all departments. This is a raw reaction video to our game against Middlesbrough, where we drew 0-0. It wasn't the most exciting, but hopefully this video will make up for it. Before we welcome on our very special guest, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, my special guest today has played many parts in popular TV shows, including Crossroads, EastEnders, Hollyoaks, and many, many more. It is a pleasure to welcome onto the show Neil Granger. Afternoon, Neil. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good to see you. How you doing?
Yeah, really good, really good. And thank you for agreeing to come on the show. Do tell us a little bit about that beer as well, because we was just touching on that.
Well, it's one of those BrewDog ones. I got the BrewDog Advent calendar, and I didn't get my way through them. It's called Tony's, but it's white chocolate and raspberry milkshake IPA, which is actually quite nice. It's a bit sweet. Don't know if I can have more than
Yeah,
one of them, but it's all right.
yeah, interesting. Definitely interesting. They do some
Yeah,
funky flavors, really, don't they? So
they really do. Yeah.
yeah. Firstly, do tell us a little bit about how you began supporting Middlesbrough and your earliest memories.
Yeah. My earliest memories of Middlesbrough, I think I was about 8 or 9. It was 1987, so I would have been 8. And we played Leicester City in one of the last games of the season. And it was, from what I can remember from that old Division 2, the bottom sides in the Division 1 and the top sides in Division 2 played each other in some kind of weird playoff. And
Mhm.
we ended up playing Chelsea in that, and I think getting promoted at the end of that season. My dad took me to see Leicester. It was obviously Ayresome Park, and that was a bit of an experience. I have a lot of amazing memories from going to Ayresome Park and watching Borough. Uh, if I'm honest, it was, as an 8-year-old, it was quite a scary place. There were a few times where I felt like I was going to get crushed, especially when a goal went in. But it was, proper football. Look back now, and it was proper football. The sight and the smell and the everything about it just felt, really exciting. But my dad made me leave it about. I think he made me leave it about 65, 70 minutes. We went I think we did 2-0 down, maybe. I think we pulled one back, but I never forgot it really. I remember leaving early. Even then, I knew that we were the only people in the ground that were leaving. And that felt just something wasn't right about that. And I think I was kind of hooked from that point on. And as a result, there aren't many games that I leave before the final whistle now, even if we're getting absolutely tanked. So it kind of started around there, really. And, I suppose one thing that I'm aware of now is when you look at Middlesbrough supporters, of a certain generation, of a younger generation who didn't experience or didn't live through the Juninho and Ravanelli and Emerson, years under Robson, they can't quite believe that we were that team at one point, that, we were one of the most exciting clubs in the country, and that we had, one of the best players in the world in Janino at the time, and he's South American Player of the Year when we signed him. So so I was lucky to live through that time, I think, to watch that amazing football, and then obviously off the back of that, watch our amazing UEFA Cup run. And it was, yeah, I mean, I suppose you get hooked from an early age with when it's your hometown club, and it's something that I've always been aware of, that being proud that because of that time in the 90s, where we had such amazing players, and where the club was bouncing, and the new stadium, it's a very different scene now. You don't really see as many Man United and Liverpool and Arsenal shirts. You just see people with Borough shirts, and I think it's a really proud area that that loves their football team. So I was kind of hooked from the age of about 8 or 9, I think.
Excellent stuff. Well, I am looking forward to discussing your career, because you've been in some of the country's biggest shows. But before that, let's talk about the game. To be honest, it's probably not going to take very long. It wasn't the most exciting affair, was it?
It wasn't. I'll be completely honest. I was watching it on my phone driving back from. I was out with the family today, so I was trying to catch as much as I can, really, and I didn't have the commentary on, so I was trying to follow it as best as I could. It wasn't the greatest of games from what I could see. I think a draw was pretty fair. I think what I often do with the matches is go on social media afterwards to get a really kind of a good understanding from the people that I know within the club, and from the fans that I know, who are very good kind of journalists, or amateur journalists, or just just tweeters, as it were, who who I trust their opinions. The general consensus has been that actually a draw was fair. I think people were surprised that we expected Bournemouth to be stronger. And I don't think, and I'll ask you in a minute, but I didn't think that was the best Bournemouth side of the season we were playing there. And I think the shame is that both teams really kind of needed 3 points. But I think it was, on the balance of things, I watching that, we had possibly 2 penalties that could have happened. I think the first one was probably a penalty. I think both, if I'm honest. That was a fairly clear handball when his arm was stuck out. I can't remember the defender's name, but
Adam Smith.
Yeah, and it was, for me, that was handball, and the tackle was pretty reckless. Although you could possibly argue that he got the ball first, even though he went through. I think it was Jones he went through. But the second one, it's hard to know. I mean, the handball rule is so difficult to understand these days. So much of it seems unclear, and given that there's no VAR in the Championship, it kind of makes it even more ambiguous. So I think a fair result was probably a draw in the end.
And yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. It does neither club any favours, but it's one of those end of season games where it's a little bit edgy, a little bit nervy. Both teams know that they need to get something out of it, and pretty much cancel each other out. What did you make of the Lerma header late in the second half, where he was completely unmarked? The Borough players just seemed to lose him from that corner.
Yeah, I think I suppose what we've seen in the last few games is the Borough that we weren't expecting at this stage of the season. We've been, don't get me wrong, we've been on a massive high since Wilder came in, and I think defensively we've been really strong. I think I think those 3 centre backs we have at the back are not only really good defenders but really good ball players, and then we've got Bamba to come in, who I thought was exceptional. I think he was probably our best player from what I saw anyway. I think we have the potential to lose someone in the box occasionally. I think it's the kind of the good thing for me is the kind of thing that I imagine Wilder gets quite upset about, because I think he's one thing he's really done is organise the team really well. Everybody knows their roles, and I think we're fairly solid. But I think from what I could see of Bournemouth, it felt like they were glimpses of the team that is looking almost definitely going to go up as the the runners up in the league. But I mean, what was your take on it? Do you think that was more about the a good passage of play from Bournemouth or some, difficult defending from us?
I think the defensive side of it, at that, to be honest, Middlesbrough defended well
Yeah.
throughout the game. And to be fair, we've got better. We have got better at
Yeah.
defending. There was times, especially in the recent game against West Brom, where it was questionable. Against Bristol City before that, yes, we won 3-2, but again, very, very questionable. Losing players. That second goal against Bristol City that we conceded right at the end, nobody was around, nobody was aware. The players had turned off. So Scott Parker's got that part right. I think it was a bit of a one-off, and Middlesbrough were quite lucky that Lerma didn't hit the target. I think
Yeah.
he was close. He was
Mhm.
close. But to be fair, that was the only player that Middlesbrough lost all game defensively. So,
Yeah.
do you feel that Middlesbrough have got it in them to get into the playoffs and get promoted through them?
I definitely think they've got it in them. Yeah. And I think, we've had under Pulis, we had some close runs. And if I can, looking back now, and I actually, I was very clear at the time. I didn't really want us to get into the playoffs then, and I don't say that as someone who hasn't invested, as financial investment in the club. I'm
Yeah.
sure Steve Gibson is desperate for us to get in the playoffs every time because the promotion means a lot. But we were so badly equipped at the time under Pulis. We just weren't an outfit. And I think anyone, all Borough fans that witnessed Karanka when he was in the Premier League and the football that we were playing was just so far off the mark that it wasn't a fun experience. And there's always that question, isn't it? Would you rather be a terrible team in the Premier League or a really good team in the Championship? And when you bridge that gap, do Norwich fans enjoy watching their team in the Premier League get whooped every week, as opposed to absolutely walking the Championship as they did last season? So I think we can do it. I think we've got a challenge on our hands. We've got obviously Huddersfield on Monday, and that's the big one for me, because if we lose that, I think Forest are on a real roll. I know they lost today against Luton, but I think Forest will be in there. I think Huddersfield will definitely be in there. I think Luton are looking really good as well. I think if we lose, it's sort of advantage to the teams in and around us like Sheffield United. So I think we've really got to be on our game. I have a sneaking suspicion, and I'm not a negative person, but I have a sneaking suspicion we might just miss out. But I say that because I actually think what we haven't had is a proper summer transfer window for Wilder to make his own team. I think all Borough fans would agree that actually the January transfer window, the players that we brought in, Connolly, he's a Premier League player, but he's not showing anything. I mean, some of the statistics from him today were really poor, and there's a big outcry within the Borough fans of let's give someone else a try. I don't think we have. You take our strike force, you take all of our strike force away, and actually, I mean, maybe Watmore's the only one that you would keep. The rest, I think, are all kind of interchangeable. I don't think Sporar's become the player that we hoped he was and that we sing that he is. And we've not really seen much from Balogun, and definitely not seen anything from Connolly. So, is it a good time to get promoted into a league when you don't have a solid striker, when you don't have, players that know their roles? I think one thing that you would say about Brentford is that the spine of that team that came up, is the team that they've stuck with. Ivan Toney was banging in the goals for them last season, and he's banging in the goals in the Premier League. So having that consistency, I think we're missing that. So I'd love us to get promoted. If we don't, I don't think that's a huge, massive loss. And I think we've got a good chance if we win on Monday to get in the playoffs. But, it's going to be a difficult game.
I've got to be honest, I can see the third to fifth being as they are, really. So I can see Forest being in there, Luton and Huddersfield. And then it's really going to be between Sheffield United, who were beaten today against Reading at home. You've got Coventry, who beat Fulham and won today against Birmingham and are our next opponents. and then Middlesbrough as well. So, and it's quite tight, isn't it? It's only a couple of points in it. Who would you say, hand on heart, who do you reckon will take that sixth spot?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think we've got as good a chance as any of them, really. But again, I think if we lose on Monday, then I think it's advantage the other teams around us. I think. I think given Sheffield United are obviously in with a really good shout. I think Sheffield United are, they've been there and abouts for a while. Who knows? I think if we can keep Jones fit, we've obviously missed Isaiah Jones the last few games, and getting him back today was a real plus. But I don't know. It's just too tight to call. I think really. I'd love it to be us, but then you look at the teams that will be playing in the semis and potentially the final at Wembley, and that could be really, really tough because there's some momentum. Forest have got huge momentum behind them. Huddersfield are flying. I've got one of my best mates as a Huddersfield fan, and they are absolutely flying. So I'm not sure I'd love to play them really. And I think, but having said that, I think what we have with Wilder is a manager who can get a performance out of his team against most, and the cup run this year was magnificent, and it was a really good example of how we can really take it to some, top teams. So I hope it's us, but I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that you did say there as well is about Norwich. And of course, Norwich went up and they won the league last season, and they found the Premier League really difficult.
Yeah.
Of course, we've got a manager that managed to get Fulham into the Premier League, and that fell apart. And do you think the Bournemouth are equipped? And do you think Scott Parker, because there is questions in my head that he doesn't have a plan B. Do you think we're equipped to get into the Premier League, and what sort of changes do we need to make?
Well, it's an interesting one, I suppose, from an outsider's point of view. You look at, everybody loved Scott Parker. As a footballer, he was fantastic, and he was a real workhorse, and he was a dependable guy. And as a manager, there's so many viral videos of his interviews because he's really charismatic. He's really he was great for the Premier League with Fulham. But you see a lot of parallels in his role with Bournemouth. Everybody enjoyed Bournemouth in the Premier League. I think many people were sad to see Bournemouth leave. But again, a team that have been have punched above their weight a lot. And a team with a lovely ground, but a smaller ground, a smaller fan base, as it were. And there's nothing wrong with that. All teams, deserve to be in the Premier League. And Bournemouth gave us some fantastic football over the years that they were in the Premier League. But you worry that a manager like that needs a bit more backing. And a question is, will he get that kind of backing if when Bournemouth go up? Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like Lampard at the moment at Everton. You sort of look at a manager and think, well, did we see the best of them at other clubs? Lampard's season with Chelsea, where he didn't have a transfer window to buy anyone, was that the pinnacle that he could do? Was him, bringing players through at Derby and doing well with Derby? Was that as high as it goes? And I'd like to think not for someone like Scott Parker, because I really like him. And, and as I say, I think one of the things that, Bournemouth are one of those teams that everybody just likes. It's an away day that I think everyone enjoys, because there aren't many stadiums like that, nice community stadiums, as it were. It's hard to know. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that he will be different to last time you were up with Eddie Howe?
To be honest, I think my biggest concern is I don't think he's got plan B, and his time in the Premier League with Fulham with Eddie.
Yeah.
The big benefit that Eddie had was that he was managing those players, and his first spell, some of those players were there in the first spell, and some come on board in the second spell, but he had a lot of time to nurture those players. We went into the Premier League with that squad. Yeah. We did make a few additions, but we didn't change what worked, and that's what Eddie did. That was what those players gave 120%. You had the Mark Pughs, the Harry Arters,
Mm,
who weren't big names but had something to prove. You had
yeah,
Steve Cook, who, until Eddie really gave him a proper run, was he was frozen out at Brighton. Come to Bournemouth under Lee Bradbury, Eddie come on board and gave him a prolonged run,
yeah.
and look how he repaid him. So Eddie had that time with those players beforehand. Scott Parker's only had this season, and I think that is sometimes a bit of a challenge. You've seen it at Burnley when Dyche took over there. He had a little while to actually turn those players into what he wanted to get them into the Premier League, and that's why he's done so well. And that's why it's completely shocking why he's lost his job today.
Yeah.
So my concern is, will Scott Parker be able to take us to the next level, have that plan B, or are we going to become a bit of a Norwich? And there's no guarantees in that, because look at West Brom and them dropping out of the Premier League. There's no guarantees that you'll go straight back up. But yeah,
Mm.
we're hopeful. We're hopeful, but I don't. Yeah, I'm not too sure we are ready at this moment in time. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, I kind of would, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, but then it's hard to know. I mean, I don't think many people thought that Brentford would be performing the way they are, and let's face it, they were looking like they were going to get relegated until Ericsson came in, and one player galvanized the whole team and it seemed to make everyone around him play better. So you just never know in these seasons. I think at the beginning of the season, Watford looked like they had something about them, and and Norwich have sort of always been a potentially going to finish bottom. But then obviously they get Dean Smith come in, and they look like they might have a bit of fight in them. It's hard to know, but I think the one thing's for sure: the Premier League has got harder and harder, and I think in years gone by, a team as bad as Everton would have been mid bottom table. They wouldn't have been fighting for relegation because there would have been a lot more teams worse than them. In a season like this, you can really see that there aren't many bad teams anymore, and each team is capable of a really good result on their day. And the Premier League has never been better, and I think that's what makes it harder for some clubs coming up. But then you could argue that the hardest league in the world is the Championship. And, we've been battling out for years, and we see, playing teams that get promoted and seeing them do really well, Brentford being a really good case in point. But then there are those teams that don't quite make it. And yeah, it'll be interesting. I think I hope you do. I really like Scott Parker, and I hope you do. And I think everyone will be pleased to see Bournemouth back. It's just, it's just hard to be one of those teams and one of those, like a Sean Dyche, Burnley, or an Eddie Howe Bournemouth. It's hard to be one of those teams that are constantly grinding it out and getting 120% from players that are Championship quality, but Premier League mentality. Time will tell. But you're going to get promoted anyway, so it doesn't. So I suppose
I really hope you're right, Neil. Let's move on to talk about your career, because as I mentioned at the start of this program, you have been in some of the biggest shows in the country. And before we actually discuss that in a bit of detail, let's show you a little bit more of Neil's showreel.
When I climb onto that stage and open up my lungs, something magical happens.
You like killing people?
No, I don't. Wish me luck. I don't think my music can heal world's problems, but I do think it can make them irrelevant.
It's deep.
Oh, I know.
I'm in love with Vicky Pearson, and I don't care who knows it!
I wanted to stop. These people were going to shoot me. They put kiddies' lives at risk along with everyone else's. And what for? They're fanatics who aren't doing anyone any good.
to change her.
Is that what you want? Before you say I do, you're free to. I'm a warrior, but I'm also tender.
It's like the music is in me and I'm just a conduit. Only now do I truly understand how Peter Andre feels. It's not the top! He's a knobhead. Jack said so too. Oh, I'm not feeling this.
So firstly, tell us a bit more about how you started out in acting and when you got your breakthrough role.
Well, I started, I suppose, like most people, I did kind of amateur dramatics when I was younger, and back in Middlesbrough, I was in the Middlesbrough Little Theatre Juniors, which was kind of, a chance to try out and do plays. And I went to a school where everyone was sporty. I was at the same school as Jonathan Woodgate and England cricketers and England rugby players, and drama was, we had a great drama department in the school, but there weren't many people that had come from the school and gone on to do drama. So I sort of went and explored outside of the school and found my kind of people, as it were. And then I went to London, I suppose, because that was the place to have the opportunities, because at the time I didn't realize that actually there was a really good burgeoning scene in Newcastle where you could work as an actor there. But I went to I went to London, studied uni in London, and then I just started doing plays. I was at a good university doing a drama degree that meant I could use the experience of the plays as credit for for my degree. And then I got spotted by an agent, and then that agent put me up for a few things. And then one day I got a play that was in Sheffield, and I was in the play, and there were two actors in the play we all went out for dinner that night. And I said, "Oh, what you've been up to today?" And they said, "Oh, we've been in Nottingham. We're in this new soap opera called Crossroads, and we've just been at the read through." And I said, "Oh God, I'd love to be on television. I'd love to be in a soap opera." And they said, "Oh, well, we think there's one part that they haven't cast. You should get in touch with their agent." Now, I say this now, like, if anybody said to me now, I'd say, "Oh, well, that's a 1 in a billion chance. There's no way that would happen. It doesn't work like that." But I went back to my agent on the Monday morning and said, "Can you contact the casting director? There's a part that they haven't cast yet. I might be right for it." It turns out I was right for it. They auditioned me on the Tuesday. I think it was the Tuesday afternoon. I went in and I just knew as soon as I walked in the door, it was what they were looking for, which, was rare at the time. And it's even rarer now. I mean, it just doesn't happen where you get that vibe from walking in the door that you're right. So I got a phone call on the Wednesday telling me I had to travel to Nottingham that night, and I'd signed a 3-year contract for Crossroads on the Friday morning. So it was a bit of a whirlwind, really. It was literally in the space of a week I went from finding out about it to being in it and signing a contract and moving to Nottingham, which was really exciting. And then it kind of went from there, really. And it's once you're in the business, the opportunities become easier to see. But I think getting there in the first place is the hard thing. There used to be the catch-22 situation of getting your equity cards. You can't work unless you've got an equity card. You can't get an equity card. So you can't get an equity card until you've done some work. So it was, catch-22. But that's kind of gone now. But it still kind of remains you can't get an agent, and an agent is the gateway to all the work until you've done some work, and you can't work until you have an agent. Well, I suppose I hit that lucky kind of place of doing fringe theatre, getting an agent, and then getting in the system, really. And that was, guys, I mean, we're talking about 25 years ago now. And then I've kind of just stuck at it, really. And, there have been some brilliant times. There have been some really tricky times. And, most actors would declare that they can't just be an actor full time. The amount of actors that work full time as actors is probably 1 or 2% at the most. Most actors have to find a way to earn a living and keep themselves sane when they're not working, whether it be, because of the pandemic, or because the work dries up, or because your casting bracket that you're in is wrong. So that's kind of how I got into it, really. I went through that kind of system, and then it's been 25 years down the line.
And of course, in Crossroads, you played Phil Berry. In that role, you was very, very popular, especially with the female fans as well. What were the reactions that you had?
Well, I mean, you see, it tended to be young girls, which at the time wasn't too bad because I was only 21. But now,
Yeah.
when I look back, it was strange. The weird thing is, I meet those young girls now who are like 30-year-old women, and I had a funny experience in that a few years ago, a mate of mine said, "Oh, I want you to meet my new girlfriend," and I realized this. She was quite shy, and he was like, "I'm really sorry. I need to call her out on this. She had a poster of you on her bedroom wall when she was a little girl." I was like, "That's just really weird." She was like literally a teenager, but yeah, it was an interesting one. It was I look back with it with such fondness. It was I can't tell you how cool it felt to be doing at the time, and the show was always regarded. I think the show's often been branded with the eyes of people who saw the original. I think it was nowhere near as bad as the original. I don't think it was actually a bad show. It just wasn't a very good show, but it was daytime soap opera, and having done quite a lot of daytime soap, they're all pretty much of a muchness. None of them are particularly amazing, but it was decent. They threw a lot of money at it. The sets were amazing, and everybody talks about the wobbly sets of Crossroads. Well, those sets were, they got the designer of Full Metal Jacket to design the sets. They spent millions on this set, but and there were some great actors who went on to do some really good stuff. And not many people know this, but the series producer was a series producer that's gone on to be the series producer on all of the big soaps, and the script editor, the head of script, and one of the main writers on the show was one of the main writers on Doctor Who for years, and recently It's a Sin. So the people that were involved behind the scenes and the actors that were involved on it were really good. I spent 6 months working with the guy that came in to play my best friend, and a guy called Luke Evans. And I don't know if you know Luke Evans, but he's one of the biggest film stars in the world now, a huge Hollywood star. So I think people want to frame it as Crossroads. It was Crossroads, but I think a lot of these soaps are, the very nature of them is they are you're banging them out 5 times a week, and all the best shows, you can grade the quality of shows based on how much time they make it. Some films only shoot 1 or 2 minutes a day. Some dramas only shoot 10 to 12 minutes a day. Well, soaps shoot 30 minutes a day without fail because they have to make 5 episodes a week. So I think under the circumstances, it was a pretty good show, and it was a real baptism of fire for me, and I just have such good memories of doing it, of being a young lad on TV twice a day, 5 days a week, getting recognized in the street, getting, I suppose, getting confidence through, and having to become kind of sociable because so many people would recognize you, and we were going out every night, and every week was a party for about 2 years. And I don't think I've ever really recovered from that.
I've always thought that because, of course, there is five shows in a week, all half an hour in length, and whereas movies, they have production times of months, sometimes even years on end. How long was a working day?
Well, the working days don't tend to change because of contract, and working law. The only time you really see a difference in that is when you're shooting a commercial, and they tend to get around it, and sometimes you can be shooting 15, 16 hours, but that tends to be a one-off, and they pay you obviously for the overtime. But usually the shooting day is probably about 7 till 7. And I think because I was the main young character in it, I was pretty much in 7 till 7, 5 days a week for 18 months, pretty much 2 years. And most of that time you are kind of sitting around waiting to do stuff. But I suppose it's a little bit like, I hate to use the analogy, but it's a bit like being a footballer. Not all the time you're running at full pelt. You're waiting for your moment. You're keeping yourself warm. You as an actor, you have to be ready to pop onto set within a minute's notice and then suddenly turn it on, whether it be tears or emotion or remember pages of dialogue. So there's a lot of downtime, but that downtime is just getting yourself in that kind of zone. And what no one ever really talks about it. What happens with a soap quite quickly is your brain starts to work in a different way. So you start to learn dialogue really, really quickly. And because the muscle is getting honed. And if you think about it this way, this would tend to be the way it works with a soap. And any soaps that I've been a regular on, you wake up maybe 5:36, you get in, you're in the makeup chair for 6:30, you get your makeup, everything done, you're on set for 7, maybe 7:30, you have however many scenes. If you're in every scene, you're literally on set for the entire day. You get obviously an hour for lunch, but you finish at 7, you get home for 7:38, and then if you have the same amount of scenes the next day, you're learning your lines for 2 hours, and then you going to bed because you've got to get really early. So it's a relentless experience. A mate of mine's on Waterloo Road at the moment, and that is his kind of daily routine, non-stop work and homework when you get home for the next day. So it's pretty relentless, but you start to develop that muscle, and that's quite an exciting thing to be able to learn lines quickly. And as a result of that, you start to cut corners. So, I'd go out, I'd add to that. I'd learn my lines, and then I'd go out to nightclubs and bars and stay out till 1, 2 in the morning, and then I'd arrive. And when you're a young actor, you sort of take advantage a little bit of it. But it was such an exciting time to be involved in something like that. And many of the people that I worked with, it was their first experience of something like that as well. So we just went out and partied and enjoyed ourselves, and and soaked it up. And I don't think we really ever took it too seriously. And I think from the word go, the knives were out, as it were. The press were ready to bury it because that was the story they had written in their heads already. Crossroads is going to be rubbish, whether we like it or not. It's going to be rubbish. So, but we had to fight against that a little bit. But it was such good memories. And it's coming up to, I started it in 2000, so it's 22 years since I started it.
What was it like when they did choose to end the show, and what did you decide to move on to next?
Well, looking back at the time, it was a difficult one because it was a strange time for the makers of it, Carlton Television, because Carlton TV were in a position where Carlton and Granada were trying to find a way to merge. And from what I understood at the time, they weren't allowed to merge. They were only allowed to get involved in a takeover. Carlton had just bought the rights. I don't know if you remember this, but had just bought the rights to all of the football outside the top 2 divisions. Mm-hmm. And they hadn't really thought it through because actually, they were never going to draw a big audience for Bury versus Torquay. So they'd spent a lot of money on something that they weren't going to use. So they had to start dumbing down their programs. Things like Peak Practice were removed. It was cancelled in its more successful year. We were always going to be on a hiding to nothing. So they basically asked for a contract extension. They didn't get the contract extension, which was going to be 6 months. They only got 3 months. So the makers said, well, we can't do anything with 3 months, because I suppose how I was told it worked at the time is that if you want to get people on This Morning, or at the time The Big Breakfast, and they say, oh, okay, how's the show doing? Oh, we've only got a 3-month extension. Oh, well, we don't want to promote that. People don't really buy into it. And the show didn't really have much legs as a result of the lack of confidence that the network was showing. So they basically put it on a hiatus, and I was on a hiatus for about 6 months where we didn't do anything. We just kind of sat at home waiting to find out what was happening. And actually, I say sat at home. I went on and did a film in the gap, and I assumed that once I'd come back from doing that film, I'd just go back into it. And then we all got a letter from a lady called Yvonne Grace, and Yvonne Grace was at the time known for being one of the judges on Soap Stars, I think it was called, this reality TV show they did about soap people, and she was known for being a bit of a cutthroat, and we all got this quite cutthroat letter basically saying thank you, but we don't want to use you again. and they recast 85% of all of the cast and they changed the names of the characters, but they pretty much created new characters that were the same. So I got replaced by a blonde 6-foot buff guy, and it lasted 6 months and then it fully died. And I don't think many of us that left were that sad to see it die in its new incarnation. But I just think it was buried from the start, really. It was a great show to be involved with. It was really exciting to be a young man in a soap opera at that time, but it was buried as soon as the press realized that, Crossroads, a show that had been derided for many years, was coming back. They were ready to, it was the whipping boy of soap opera. And the one thing that I was told at the beginning still stays true is that if a soap opera is going to be successful, it has to have time. And every single soap opera that exists now, that's on television now, got panned in its first few weeks, months, even years. Doctors was a joke when it first started, but the BBC stuck with it, and now Doctors is a staple of the daytime soap landscape. Coronation Street was laughed at, EastEnders was laughed at, Emmerdale was laughed at. It's just about longevity, I suppose, sticking it out, and some soaps make it and some don't. But it was really good fun. I really enjoyed it.
And what did you go on to next? What show did you decide to? Where did the career take you?
Well, after that had kind of happened, I had quite a long time where I didn't work really, and that was challenging. And I think being in a show like that for a long time, it was a bit of a dirty word in the industry. I would meet with casting directors. I remember once meeting for a big movie, and the casting director said, "Oh, the director's going to love you, but don't tell him you were in Crossroads." And there was an element of that. And one thing that a lot of me and a lot of the cast would do is sort of compare notes about the exact same thing happening. Each time we would want to move to that next stage in our careers, we were sort of being held back by being on a show that had been cancelled. And that was a little bit of a challenge, I think. We were, I think we were all fairly frustrated. And I went off and did theatre. So I went and worked in Scarborough a lot with Sir Alan Ayckbourn, who, the most prolific playwright in history. I think even more prolific than Shakespeare. I think that's true. Yes, I'm pretty sure it's true. But he was brilliant because I think, one of the great things about acting is that when you're working as an actor in a show, or when you're working on television, you get caught up in this kind of thing of not necessarily fame, but notoriety and exposure. And one of the things that actors enjoy, most actors don't really do it for that. That's one of the byproducts of it. I think footballers would be the same. Footballers don't really do it to be, rich and famous. They do it because they kicked a ball from the moment they were born and they love it. And there's no feeling like scoring a goal. And I think the great thing about something like theatre is you can throw yourself into theatre. There's no reaction quite like coming off stage. And, it doesn't matter what TV show you're doing. When they say cut, it's quite a lonely place. No one is cheering, no one's clapping, no one's giving you immediate feedback about whether you did good or not. You often don't see what you've just filmed for months. Sometimes you never see it ever again, because sometimes it doesn't make the cut. The director doesn't really have any time to come and say, "Hey, well done, I love that. That was brilliant." They just move on to their next bit because they're up against the time. But in theatre, you get that immediate reaction. You get, you can feel an audience are with you. You can feel if they really enjoy what you're doing. The applause means a lot. Actors are fairly needy people and they love that. And so I kind of threw myself into theatre really and started to kind of rebuild myself that way. It's a common theme from people I know that have worked on soaps that you have to sort of reinvent yourself a little bit, because if you're in a soap for a short amount of time, then you've got to rebalance how you live after a soap. I earned a really good living for the years that I was in a soap, and then suddenly I went from earning that to not earning any money for a few months, and that's hard to deal with. You've got to cut your expenses straight away. You've got to go, well, I can't afford to rent that place. I'm going to have to downsize, and all those things to take into account. And you've got to if you've been in a soap for 10, 20 years, I think those are the people that really struggle as well, because it's like they've been born again. They've got to start all over again. Someone like Adam Woodyat, who was in EastEnders for, God, he was in EastEnders about 20, 25 years, I think. What does he do? He relies on the collateral that he's built up from the show and people recognizing him and wanting to use him and stuff. But I don't see him moving on to dramas and bigger and better things. It's just the nature of the game is that sometimes you're not bankable, as it were. So I sort of rebuilt that way, and it kind of, my career kind of moved on, and I had my next big kind of moment when I worked on Hebben years later, and Hebben was the next step in my kind of, the next chance for me to kind of, get my teeth into something long term. And I think, acting is up and down constantly. Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's very, very quiet. The pandemic has been a real leveler for a lot of people because, it's been scary out there for actors, really. Anyone in the entertainment industry, it's been really worrying. But you find your way, I suppose. You find you accept sometimes that it's not working for you. You have to find something inside you that believes that you are good enough, even if the rest, even if you're not getting the jobs, and you have to trust your own feedback, because often you audition for something and then you never hear about it ever again, and that can be really intimidating because your first thought is, what did I do wrong? But often it's not about anything like that. It's about not being the right fit for a director or somebody else coming in and just being perfect. And I always say to people, if they want to really understand how the industry works or casting works, watch those big TV shows when they show the auditions of big stars auditioning for them that didn't get the roles. I always think The Office, the American Office, is a great example of it, because they've got all these big stars that audition for it, who weren't right for the role, but obviously were brilliant and their take was excellent. But the industry is overpopulated. A good example is, this is pre-pandemic, obviously it's probably different since the pandemic, but the statistic was, at any given time 5% of actors are working. So at any given time 95% of actors are out of work. In no other industry would that ever be sustainable. So, and that's a variety of different factors. So I suppose you rely on the fact that actually to earn a living out of acting is success. Fame is winning the lottery. Yeah. Most people will never get close to that, but making a living is enough.
Of course, you did have a stint as well in Hollyoaks, and you played D.S. Callard. And what was it like playing a detective investigating a murder of a long-standing character like Russ Owen?
It was I had a horrible experience on that show, I'll be honest. My son was born. I started the show in May the year. My son was born in the October. And it was I've been in a long-running soap that didn't particularly have a great name in Crossroads, so I sort of agreed to do it, knowing that it wasn't going to be the greatest television I'd ever made in my entire life. But I thought actually it'd be good show to do. I'm a semi-regular, so that means I'm only in 1 or 2 episodes, maybe 3 or 4 a month maximum. Travel up from London to Liverpool to film. Couple of scenes, back again, everything fine. And to begin with, it was really nice. It was a really nice gig because, as I said, I'd come from that experience of Crossroads where I was in 5 days a week, 12 hours a day pretty much, and that was intensive, and you can't really do anything else around that. But it kind of suited me well, and my contract got extended, and then it got extended over the birth of my child. And I don't know, are you a father yourself? I don't know.
Yes, yeah. I am. Yeah.
So when they say oh, great, nice one. But when they say the due date, usually the due date is just it's just a shot in the dark, isn't it? Really, it's like what day is the the playoff semi-final going to be on? 6 months in advance. You never know. You just roughly have an idea. So I'd
Yeah.
kind of said at the time, listen, this is the due date for my son. I don't know. I need some time either side of it. And they were being kind of cagey about it. Anyway, it came down to it that they wouldn't allow me time off around the birth of my son. So it came to a bit of a, I hate to use the word, but crossroads, where they said, look, you need to be available. And I said, I'm not going to be available. There's no way. So they recast me. So my experience was that actually they were ruthless and quite nasty people. And had I have had the energy of a man that wasn't, holding a newborn baby and, trying to do the thing that all fathers do in the first few weeks of their wife giving birth, I probably would have fought it a little bit more. I probably would have kind of, got a bit more angry and taken it a little bit more seriously. But I didn't really have the energy to do it at the time. And I think they were kind of, I think since then, worse things have come out about how they treat actors, about the issues they have around, equality and diversity, and an environmental and social governance. So, it's no surprise, and I probably should have known what I was walking into. So I never think of it as the role as anything other than just I was in for a few episodes, and then they recast me because they weren't willing to support me when my son was born. But yeah,
I can imagine what that was like, because having been through that myself, when becoming a father twice. It's a scary period of time, isn't it? But also exciting. It's every emotion that you could have, isn't it? And I guess when somebody's not supportive, it's just frustrating and just
really
disappointing.
Yeah, I think that was the big thing for me. It was disappointment, and there are two factors in there really. Like my wife is an actress, and I think we had a different experience. My wife used to be in a series of commercials with Rob Brydon for P&O Cruises, and she gave birth around the time she had to film one in the Middle East, and they were incredible. The production company, they really supported her. They flew us all out. I looked after my son while she filmed, and it was a good example of supporting new parents, making it work. But so often you hear the opposite. We had a friend recently that was a few weeks pregnant, and the production company found out, and they recast her, and they pretended that the role had been cut, and it hadn't. And she took them to court, and she won eventually. And I think it's just disappointing. And I think had I have been a woman, it might have been a slightly better experience. And I think that says a lot about kind of dads in these situations, but definitely self-employed dads. There's no paternity for a self-employed dad. You just got to get on with it. You just got to work. But I think ultimately it came down to, I can be a bit outspoken on social media. If I think there's an injustice happening, I tend to get weighed in. I can't help myself really. But I think ultimately I thought long and hard about this and thought, well, do you know what? It would be very different if it was a Mike Leigh film. And I'd said, you know what? They took the role away from me and I'm devastated. But actually it was Hollyoaks.
Yeah.
And I didn't really care that much. And I was only ever doing it for, money. So actually they probably got what they, I probably got what I deserved, and they probably got what they paid for. So, it's frustrating. But I think the industry is going to have to change at some point. It's going to have to learn that it can't, that it can't treat people like products, as it were.
You've also done a couple of voiceovers for computer games as well. Most notably, the Assassin's Creed series. Is that fun to do? And how different is it portraying a virtual character?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's really fun to do, and I've worked on a lot of computer games. I do quite a bit of game voiceover, but I do mostly motion capture for computer games. So for anyone that doesn't know what motion capture is, I don that lycra suit and I put those and on those lycra suits, you've got little kind of infrared, well, not even infrared balls, but just reflective balls that reflect on these, God, I don't know how many there are, probably 150 infrared cameras. So that's an exciting experience to do because you're physically bringing a character to life. Often just bringing the physicality and not the voice. But when you're doing voiceover, when I think about something like Assassin's Creed, it's a challenging one because you only actually get a still shot of what the character looks like. And in some ways that's freeing because you can bring it to life and what you think it would sound like, how you think it would, operate, what kind of, a lot of the Assassin's Creed work I did was what I call kind of violence noises, because that's just the nature of these games. I did some work on, I think there was a Battlefront game or a Battlefield. I never know which one's which because I'm not really a gamer, but one of them was set in the middle of the First or Second World War. And I just spent an entire day just making the noises of people getting hit by shrapnel. And you'll do 5 different takes of, you're just doing that for a whole day. Or screaming and stuff like that. So some days are really fun. Other days you just kind of it becomes quite monotonous. It's really wasted on me. I'm a gamer, not a huge gamer, but I'm a gamer of the 90s. So I still love my Amiga games. I was a huge fan of games like Sensible Soccer and Secret of Monkey Island and things like that. And I haven't really played the games that I've ever worked on, which is a real shame. So I'm hoping that when I'll still keep working on games, and then when my son gets to a certain age, he can play the games that I'm in. But it's really good fun. I did all the movement for Harry Potter in all of the Harry Potter games, bar one, I think, bar the last one, in which I was Ron, and they got the voiceover, the sound-alike voiceover guy, a really good mate, Michael Adam Sopp, who did the movement and the voiceover for Harry. But I always think that's quite a nice one for me because it's the only game I can kind of universally say to people of a certain age, especially Harry Potter fans, oh, do you like the games? And they're like, yeah, because I got to create some of the spells in the games that don't appear in the films. So that you never know what you're going to get, really. Sometimes it can feel like a day, really feel like a job. Other days it feels incredibly creative, and you never really know with voiceover. But I really enjoy going into a booth and recording voiceover. I really enjoy creating characters, and you get to do that occasionally.
I've got to be honest, I'm a Sensible Soccer fan as well. And Sonic the Hedgehog, how many times have I completed that first game? Too many.
They don't make them as good as that anymore. I really believe it.
That's why I've got a Sega Mega Drive Mini. So
nice.
So I had to get one of those as soon as they come out. What advice would you give to anybody wanting to get into acting? And somebody, say for example, of 16 years old, what would you say and what would you advise them to do first?
Well, I think what I tend to say to people, and I do a lot of workshops with young drama students on how they would enter the industry. I'm aware that now is a really challenging time for anyone. Recently, I don't know if you read it in the news, but a drama school that has a place called Alra, that has a place in the north and in the south, has just basically told all their students that their term won't be completed and they've lost all their fees, and that's the state of the industry at the moment. And there's lots of things going on there, but it's an overpopulated industry with more and more people joining the industry, so it can feel overwhelming. As I say, the statistic is around about 5. Somebody told me it was even lower now. 5% of actors are working at any given time. So I suppose the thing I would always say to actors is, if you love it, if you really want to do it, then absolutely go for it. But don't put all of your eggs in one basket. I have another job. I have a second career that I do alongside things that got me through the pandemic, that fulfills me when the work as an actor is not happening. And I trained in other ways to find other things that will kind of keep me afloat. But also, as an actor, you can sometimes be tied to this, to this disempowered entity, and it's nice to be empowered and have you be the master of your own destiny, as it were. So I suppose I would say to anyone that wants to do it, do it. Always have a sideline, or what do they call it in America? They call it a side hustle. Have a side hustle, because there's nothing more depressing than being an actor out of work, working in a bar, or being an actor out of work and literally just taking anything you can get your hands on to make a living, because desperation to be cast in something is obvious from the moment you walk in a door. The more desperate you are for a part, the more people can kind of smell it, and it's not as an attractive quality in an actor. I think when it comes to the acting, I would always say to people, work however you can. If you don't have an agent, do short films, do fringe theatre, do anything that you can be seen in. Write to people, but no one will ever sign you on the basis of just being an actor. You have to show them what you do. They have to see what you do. And if they sign you without seeing what you do, then often they're doing it to kind of make some money out of you, and not really, and they're probably kind of defrauding you out of that money. So you have to be careful with agents. Some of them are, the good agents are incredible. They are the gatekeepers to all the work. But there are some charlatans that exist out there. So I would always say, do stuff, make work, enjoy the craft. Again, it's not an industry where people become millionaires. Very few people become Hollywood stars. Very, very few people. Lottery winners. It's the same as playing the lottery, really. If any, people don't play the lottery expecting that they're going to win. They play the lottery, dreaming that they might. And I think that's got to be the same way as an actor. Put the hard yards in. Work as hard as you can. And know that at some point it might not be for you. It might not happen for you, and that's all right. I think all actors know that at some point they might stop, and I don't think there's any shame in that. I think actors, can just move on to something else. There's a lot to be gained out of it, and it's been 25 years for me. I've had a bit of a, I've had a wonderful year acting wise. I've been working on some really amazing projects and feel really blessed for that. But the last 5 years has been up and down. There's been some tough times. Longevity, I suppose, is the key. So I would say to people, get yourself a side hustle, and really appreciate that there's not a foregone conclusion that you'll make a living. If you can make a living as an actor, you're a success. That's what I believe.
And do tell us, final question, Neil, what is the plans for the future?
Well, I've had a quite nice run of it in the last few months. So I did last year. I filmed a series called The Capture for BBC. That I don't know when that's going to be out. Some point later in the year, I think. I also filmed a drama for ITV in February, which is called A Spy Among Friends. That is with Guy Pearce of LA Confidential and I think Oliver Confidential, and Neighbours fame. He would hate that I said that, but we do remember him from Neighbours. And Damien Lewis. And then I'm just about to start filming a 3-part ITV drama. I don't know if I can say what it is, but I'm about to start filming a 3-part ITV drama set in the Northeast. Yeah, so I'm having a bit of a purple patch, as it were. So that's what's coming up for me. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this show, Neil. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and all the very, very best for the future. And hopefully, fingers crossed, Middlesbrough will come join us as well in the Premier League, and we can do this all again next season.
Well, exactly. If we do, we'll definitely have to do this again.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Neil.
Pleasure.
Cheers, mate. And thank you for joining me on this raw reaction video. Please do remember to hit the like, the subscribe and the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here on Up the Cherries in All Departments. Please also do check out our interview with Jeff Winter. We've also done interviews with Effa Kuku, Steve Fletcher, Steve Cook, of course, Harry Redknapp, Beth Powney, Andy Burnell, David Beckham's old agent, and many, many more. So please do remember to check out all those videos. Do remember to hit the subscribe. It means the world to us, and also the like button. Until the next video, up the cherries, and thank you for joining me.